right off the bat, entrepreneurship isn't for everyone.
What do you feel like are the key ingredients to starting, to having an idea and taking it to something that works?
Your idea is only going to ever be worth what somebody is willing to pay for it, period. All right, welcome back to another episode of the BYU Tech Transfer podcast. Today, slightly different format. Our guest for today unexpectedly had to cancel last night, so I was scrambling to find another guest, but we ended up, we'll reverse the roles a little bit today. Kyle was nice enough to come in. He's our prototyping intern, so he's going to interview me. And I've been working in tech transfer for about 2 years now, and so I wanted to kind of give an update on some of my perspectives on tech transfer, intellectual property, entrepreneurship, and specifically look at things I wish I knew, or maybe advice that I give myself as a student. So, Kyle, go ahead and take it away.
That's great. That sounds great, Bennett. I'm excited because me personally, I don't know much about how to start a business. But obviously, you've had a lot of experience with these. In these 2 years, could you give me like a ballpark of like how many people you think you've helped or people you've advised on starting businesses?
Yeah, I mean, we're always careful not to give official business advice or official legal advice,
Sure.
But as far as helping collaborate with our student entrepreneurs specifically to start businesses, I think we're averaging in the engineering technologies about one startup per month. I think it's a little bit lower than that, so not quite one, but that's typically what we're averaging out to be for these 2 years. So, that's probably, if we did the raw numbers, maybe about 20 startups over the 2-year period, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. I'd have to look at the numbers specifically. But yeah, just helping them focus in on the most important things at this stage of development for the specific technology that they're looking to spin out from the university.
Okay. That's awesome. That's great. Clearly, you have more experience than me, so I'm glad I'm interviewing you.
I've just been doing it longer. That's all it is.
Oh, okay. That's fair.
That's fair.
Okay. We have a couple ideas of questions here that we thought might be most beneficial to hear your perspective on.
Yeah.
But what do you feel like are the key ingredients to starting, to having an idea and taking it to something that works?
Yeah, this is something that I've come to over time. But I think fundamentally, like right off the bat, entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, and I think most people see the success of entrepreneurship and they see the outcomes of it, and that's what they are attracted to. But the actual pain associated with it can be a bit much for people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's one thing that I've learned is that taking the risks associated with entrepreneurship, struggling with the startup world, right? Finding funding, securing your intellectual property, even just coming up with an idea that might have impact in the market. It's not necessarily better or worse than just going and working for somebody else, especially coming from a technical background. Most of the students that I went through college with, they are employees at large companies across the U.S., or internationally. And that is perfectly fine. They have great careers, right? They're continuing to learn. They're continuing to progress, both monetarily and in their education and skill level. So, it's not one or the other. So I would say the most important, maybe critical first step for any entrepreneur is desire, right? Like, is this something that you really want to do, and why do you want to do it? What is your motivation behind it? Some entrepreneurs, it's purely financial, right? They look at that end goal and they go, it's worth the pain to get through and to end up with that financial payout at the end. Others, it's very purpose-driven, right? Like, I want to help these particular people with this particular problem that they're struggling with. And that's enough to motivate them to kind of walk through the fire, so to say. So whatever the reasoning is, it has to be a strong desire to be an entrepreneur from the start. I don't know that it's something that other people can provide for you. It really has to come internally. And you can learn it over time, but it needs to come from within.
I like that answer. I've met a couple entrepreneurs, and I feel like there's kind of a type. Mm-hmm. At least there's obviously different people, but there's overlaying characteristics. Me myself, I can tell you, I'm definitely not the entrepreneur type. I prefer being the cog in the machine.
We're working on you, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Who knows? You can change. But it's definitely not the easiest thing, and it's risky. It takes a certain amount of confidence to be willing to risk.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, I've worked for a number of different companies, and one of the nicest things, including BYU, right? And the nicest thing about it is the consistency and steadiness of the paycheck. Where a startup, even if you sign on as an employee, right, the finances, if they're not in order, you might, miss your paycheck by a couple of days every week, or every pay period or a week, or it's just a lot more unpredictable than most established companies would be.
Right. And I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs, they take a couple tries before one of their businesses work out. It takes
almost
multiple.
always. I mean, the likelihood that you're going to hit it out of the park on your very first try is pretty low, statistically speaking. Obviously every entrepreneur is different and every venture is different.
Every idea, right?
But yeah, typically most entrepreneurs, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 tries. Some of my favorite entrepreneurs that we deal with, on a monthly, daily basis for BYU Tech Transfer, their list of failures is much longer than their list of successes. But because they've had those successes, that's what people tend to focus in on.
Right. So what do you think is like maybe the first signs of either a good idea or a bad idea? Like when is the turning point where you should say, this maybe wasn't a good idea, let's look for something else, or like try and shift gears?
Yeah. I think I would phrase that as like what is the value behind your idea, right? And how do you correctly evaluate that and present it to others? I would say from my own perspective, when I was, doing my undergraduate studies here, my opinion has changed a lot from that time. And during that time, I thought that the idea was the most important part of the business, the product, the venture, right? That was the most important aspect. And what I've learned over time is it's just frankly not true. It is an important aspect of it, but it is rarely the most important, even in highly technical, and we deal with highly technical technologies, right? The cutting edge of research, even if it's a larger part than standard, it's still, and again, this is my opinion, likely a minority contribution to the overall success of the venture. And that was hard to wrap my mind around. I thought, well, if you own the patent for some critical piece of technology, shouldn't you be the one who benefits the most from the commercialization of that technology? But the more you learn about running a business and all the different issues that have to be solved to take that idea to market, and the financial burdens, the financial risk that people have to take on to be able to fund the opportunity for this to maybe enter the market, and then finding a good market fit, and then getting that customer feedback and competing with what else is out there, even if you have a patent, all of that contributes as significantly as the core idea. And so the example that I give people all the time, as an engineer, I'm always getting people pitching me their ideas, and this is maybe a silly example, but one that I think highlights the problem. It's as if somebody were to walk up to you and say, hey, I've got a great idea for you, right? It's the flying car. Now, all you have to do is figure it out.
Right.
Well, that is a great idea, right? A flying car is a fantastic idea. But the figuring it out part
Incredibly
seems to be the
difficult.
trouble, right? Like the originality of that idea at this point in time is, pretty low. But at one point, somebody first came up with that idea, and all you have to do is figure it out. That figuring it out part, I now have a lot more respect for and understanding, not just from working with Tech Transfer, but from working in industry, starting my own company, doing those types of things. I have a much more healthy respect for that portion of the project.
Okay. So you're saying the idea is the kickstart, but you have to run on your own fuel from that point on. Like you have to be putting in your effort. Everything else is going to matter a lot more than the idea once you start. Yeah,
they're both important, but you just have to manage your expectations, right? And this is especially true when it comes to licensing. So before I got into BYU's Tech Transfer, I was focused on developing my own ideas and licensing them to industry.
Okay.
And lots of, I have some successes there, but a lot of failures, honestly speaking. And what you learn very quickly is that if you're not appropriately valuing your contribution to the overall process, you come across as unreasonable and people don't want to work with you, right? So, for example, I have licensed a very small piece of technology. It's a rotary guard insert that protects your fingers when you're cutting for like quilting. My mother did a lot of quilting. And initially I thought, this is the solution to solving injuries in the quilting space. And so the first few conversations that I had with potential suppliers and licensees for that technology went very poorly because I was, expecting a royalty that was just ridiculous in that specific market segment, like more than what they're getting for producing the part. And so very quickly I realized, I need to lower my expectations not undervaluing the technology, but just correctly valuing it in the eyes of the people who are going to pay for it, right? And I think that's a important lesson that every entrepreneur needs to learn, an inventor, right, is that your idea is only going to ever be worth what somebody is willing to pay for it, period, right? And there's ways to get that value up, right? But at its most basic level, basic economic level, if nobody's willing to pay for it, then fundamentally it's not worth anything. And I saw that especially when I worked in Florida at a small product design firm. We would get inventors coming in all the time with their ideas. And a common pitfall that I would see from these inventors is that overvaluation and that unwillingness to allow the idea to be monetized in the way that made sense at that specific moment in time, holding out for that big payday that ultimately never came. I met several inventors who had granted patents for 19 years just about to expire, still waiting for that multi-million-dollar payout. They had opportunities along the way that they had passed up holding out for it, and now they're facing expiration. And personally, from my perspective, if I was acquiring a piece of technology and I could either pay a whole lot of money for it or wait a year for the patent to expire, I'm just going to wait a year, right? I'm just going to work quietly in the background, let the patent expire, and I'm going to roll out that product. So I don't know. I think that correct evaluation of the idea is incredibly hard to understand if you haven't been through the process, but incredibly important to being reasonable in those conversations where you're going to monetize those ideas. Sorry, that was a bit of a rambling answer, but a little bit of my perspective there.
Yeah, and that highlights to me why it's like helpful, especially for the service that the Tech Transfer office provides, of getting your foot in the door and starting that that process from patent to prepared for someone to take something to market. Because when they can take it to the company and say, we have this prototype, we have this thing that works, how much is this worth you? It's a lot more than just saying, here's a flying car, it's a cool idea,
yes.
Go with it.
Yeah, and that is one of the cool things about Tech Transfer is that typically those ideas are developed much further, right, than just a napkin sketch. You actually have foundational research behind it, you have publications, you have data, like you have all of these things, sometimes granted patents, right, securing the idea even more fully. So the value that we contribute, as an office to these inventions being created by the university is substantial. And the researcher's contribution is fundamental, right? Like they are the ones who come up with these ideas and perfect them. But even then, there is still going to be a gap between what you have as an idea, right? What you're suggesting as the flying car and the actualization of the flying car. And so being reasonable in the handoff and the valuation, understanding that gap is going to be filled by a lot of time just dollars, right? Like somebody is going to have to finance it somewhere and take on a financial risk. And that's not a small thing. I mean, not everybody is willing to take on those types of financial risks. And so you have to value that type of risk at a premium, in my opinion.
Okay. So what do you think? We've talked about the variables that are out of your control, like how many royalties the company's willing to pay you for your idea, or maybe how much that idea really in the end is worth.
Right.
But what do you think the variables are that you can control with your idea, with your patent, with your whatever you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a few strategies that I've come up with, as I've kind of stumbled my way through learning this over time. And one of them is validating the uniqueness of your idea early on. It's easy, especially as a student, you tend to overvalue your unique train of thought, right? Like you'll think of an idea and you'll think that you are the first person to have ever thought of, and again, we keep coming back to this example, right? The flying car, right? And now you just need to figure out how to make it work. But what I've learned is that with a little bit of effort and a little bit of background research, for my ideas at this point, I am incredibly surprised if any idea that I have is truly unique. 99% of the time, it exists out there in the world in some form. And even if it's not exactly what I had envisioned, the next step of that process is understanding the value add of your uniqueness, right? So like 99% of the time I kill my ideas because they're just not unique. It already exists, it's already being produced, and it's being produced for less than I can make it for.
Right, better quality, something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, so I kill the idea outright, and I try to do that very quickly these days. And then for anything that does have some unique aspect to it that might be patentable, that I could protect with some IP, and that might be licensable. Next, you have to look at like what is the actual, and this is a hard judgment call to make, but what is the value of that improvement? Because different doesn't necessarily equal better, especially when you're competing against established processes and supply chains and sunk cost into marketing and branding. So if you're going to come in and disrupt, the value that it provides has to be, exceedingly more than what you're going to get from it as a royalty, and enough that a company is going to be willing to make that transition. Because even if you're going to cut their costs in half, they're going to have to spend additional money to retool and adjust their supply chain and find different manufacturers to be able to produce whatever your new idea is. And so sometimes, again, just mathematically, people look at it and they say, hey, I could spend $50 million, right, to adjust and accommodate your new idea, which is objectively better, but that's going to eat into my profit margins by X percentage. And over that same time period, if I just sell what I'm selling right now and I just let it fade out whenever your new idea comes to market, like I'll make more money ultimately. Right. And so the finances and the economics behind change cannot be understated. Again, you need to understand this. And you don't have to be an expert in those fields, but again, if the value that you're adding is incremental, then you need to value it as incremental improvements and understand that if you're able to secure a license, the value of that license is going to be significantly less than maybe what you originally thought it was going to be. And just one note here, not every idea needs to be significantly undervalued. I feel like I'm kind of hitting that point of correctly valuing. You definitely want to fight for the most value that you can actually get out of it. But at the end of the day, again, it comes down to what are people actually going to pay for. If you set that value too high and it never moves, you're on a clock. You have 20 years of IP life if you're using a patent to protect it. Once that clock runs out and that patent is published, it's out there publicly. So, a reasonable amount of money now is, in most cases, and again, this isn't official advice to anybody, but just in my opinion, is generally going to be worth more than holding out for that big payday that may never come.
Okay. So you brought up an interesting point that I'm curious about. You talked about working with let's say I have a really new idea. Mm-hmm. And that means that a really big company that's really well established and has a beautiful system and rolls out products like crazy. Mm-hmm. I have a brand new idea and it would change all of that and it would save them a lot of money, but it requires a lot of change. Would you say that idea is a bad idea?
No, not at all, right? Because you don't have to. Sometimes the most obvious licensee for your product is the worst, right? Because it's going to be the most painful for them to change. Okay. But finding somebody who can compete in that industry, right, and structuring a deal in such a way that you can give them time to build up and make some of those changes, right? Maybe they're just starting out and they don't have a lot of capital, but they're going to be able to compete with company X, right, who is just dominating in whatever field it is that you're looking at. Strategically positioning yourself and then setting your own expectations, right? It's not going to be a big payout. They're not company X. They can't pay you $100 million for it, but they can give you a percentage. They can give you some minimums. They can do some things so that hopefully in 5 to 10 years, they're either competing directly with company X at a similar scale, or company X realizes they've made a mistake and buys out this new company that you have the license in. It's either transferred over or that revenue stream is bought out. So, yeah, I think it's a good question because especially when I first started out reaching out to different companies, you almost always go to like the big names, right? The Microsofts, the Apples, the Facebooks, which is now Meta, right? They're natural fits, right? They're technology companies. They're doing these things. They have money, right? Like, and gaining a champion within those companies can be very difficult, but finding some satellite company, somebody in the space doing something similar, or somebody who's just getting started out, tends to be a more natural fit for truly disruptive technologies like that, especially if that value is hard to convince people of, right? So the more apparent the value, the more success you're going to have with some of those larger entities, in my opinion.
Great point. So I guess in this process, right, you have an idea. What do you think is your first steps in protecting that idea?
Yeah. So again, going back to when I was a student, I thought the very first step was file a patent. Always. That's not a bad first step, but it's rarely the first step, especially if you're just starting to play around with the idea, right? What can happen is if you file that patent too early, you really haven't fleshed it out. You don't really understand how you're going to make that flying car or whatever it might be. And so your ability to secure that intellectual property is limited. You might have to be overly broad in your claims in the patent, and overly broad in a way that you're not quite sure how you're actually going to achieve those things. Mm-hmm. You don't have to reduce it to practice to receive a patent, but in my opinion, when you understand how to reduce it to practice, then what's unique about your idea is going to be easier for you to understand and more clear in your claims on the patent application. Right. So, so I wouldn't, and this is me personally, I wouldn't file a patent day one. I might file a provisional patent application if I was worried about a priority date. That's a really nice tool that we have here in the US to give you 1 year of patent pending protection. You don't have to file any claims yet, but you do have to completely describe the invention. So that's always a good first step. But I think if it were me, putting myself in your shoes, you've got an idea, what do I do first? I would want to understand the market and validate that people are willing to pay for this. Because again, the value of your idea really does boil down to what are people willing to pay for it. There's some great examples here at BYU in the entrepreneurship program. They talk about this a lot, about validating your idea. And the easiest way is to start selling your product, even sometimes before you have a product that is fully fleshed out and ready to go. But if you can create a good mock-up, if you have you have to be confident that it can be done, right? Like we don't want to have like Theranos 2.0 here, right? Where you're promising something amazing device that ultimately isn't possible to be made just, due to the laws of physics and, the advancement of science at this stage. So definitely don't do that. That's not what I'm suggesting. But if it's something that you're reasonably confident can be done, has some unique value, and you just need to understand like what is the response from the market, those dollars that you might have spent on patenting, in my opinion, might be better spent on marketing, right? And getting some of that feedback, getting some early sales, getting some early visibility and understanding, okay, is there a true market need for this or not? And what I've seen that's really interesting is I feel like startups in the tech space, they deal with two fundamentally different problems. The first one is nobody cares about my idea at all, and I'm struggling to generate any interest. If I had to be stereotypical, I would say this tends to fall into maybe technical founders camps where they've come up with objectively a technically magnificent solution to some problem, right? Or just a technical achievement. And then they're really trying to figure out like who wants to buy this, right? And so they kind of churn and they spend a bunch of money on development and prototyping and IP securement and a little bit on marketing, and they really struggle to find that product market fit. The other is they have too many people ordering the product, right? And so they're struggling to scale.
Okay.
And, they're not unrelated, right? You do have to have a good product to be able to sell it. But pretty quickly, if you're not gaining traction in the market and you have significant visibility, right? If nobody's looking at all, then that's a different problem. But if people can see it, right, and you're in the right places and putting it in front of what you feel like is the correct market segment and just nobody is buying it, huge red flag. I would say take a step back and really evaluate, am I solving a problem at a price point that people are willing to pay for? Because the second problem, the problem with scaling, that's a completely different set of problems, right? That's operations, that's logistics, that's right. Money into scaling the actual production. It might even be refining the product, right? Maybe the product isn't fully fleshed out yet, but people really like what you say it can do. So solving some of those technical issues. Both come with their own stresses, right? When you don't have a bunch of customers asking for refunds or asking where their product is, that's less stressful. But having nobody care about your solution is equally stressful, right? You just feel like you're spinning your wheels all day, empty inboxes, right? No calls, your cold calling isn't going well. So I wouldn't say that it has to be one or the other. It can be a combination, but just make sure that as you're getting started, if you are in that first camp problem, there's likely a good argument to be made to stop what you're doing working on the product and focus more on the validation. And if you're in the second camp and you don't yet have the product nailed, right, maybe slow down a little bit and focus more on the technology and the product.
Right. So you're saying there's a gray area, there's a fine line that you can walk that's between spending money on getting the idea locked in tight and it's yours.
Yes.
And also making sure people know about it and that people would want it if they knew about
and that
it.
people actually want to buy it, right? And both problems can kill companies, right? One is you don't have any revenue, and then the other is you're unable to deliver on the demand side, right? And I've seen both opportunities or problems kill companies outright. And so finding a good way to balance those two, I think, is exactly right.
Awesome.
And there's lots of other problems, but those are the two most common ones that I see.
Sure. What do you think is the necessary mindset for an entrepreneur to be successful?
Yeah, the necessary mindset. I think you have to go into it understanding that there's going to be pain, right? I think too many entrepreneurs, we see a lot of students come into the tech transfer office, right? And sometimes their expectation for how long it's going to take and how fast things will progress, they drastically underestimate those things, right? And so they get frustrated when a year in, right, they're finally starting to get their first sales, or a year in, they're finally nailing the product and starting to set up their manufacturing and starting to scale. And that can be incredibly frustrating. So I would say the number one mindset that you have to have as an entrepreneur, and this is hard to teach, it's one of the reasons that I think it takes a couple failures for entrepreneurs to really get their feet underneath of them, is just reasonable expectations for timing, reasonable expectations for what those problems are going to look like, and reasonable expectations for what success might look like for each particular venture, right? Because again, talking about valuation, I've seen entrepreneurs who, they scaled small companies and sold them for 6 figures, right? Which is nothing to sneeze at, right? But it's not a multi-million-dollar exit,
Right.
And yet that was a huge success for them, right? Because they understood that in their market and with the product that they were bringing, that meant success. And so again, if your expectations for what success is going to look like aren't aligned with what you're actually working on, no matter what happens, you're going to be unhappy, right? Because there's no way you're going to be able to meet those expectations. So correct expectations as an entrepreneur, understanding that there's going to be pain, and then a willingness to experience that pain that justifies the reward, I think are some of the key attributes for those early entrepreneurs.
Right, a lot of patience, sounds like.
A lot of patience, right? And again, right, if you're unable to get any traction whatsoever with the idea, you don't have to just keep throwing yourself against the wall, right? You can pivot, you can come up with a new idea, you can, destroy that company, let it go under, and start a new company on a completely new project. Like, all of those things are fine. And honestly, even at Tech Transfer, if we roll out a piece of technology and it's just not getting the market traction, right, or the cost, you can't get the cost down, like those types of things, like, we're not going to feel any kind of way if you need to abandon that technology and let it come back to BYU. In fact, we'll show you a bunch of other technologies, right, that might be a better fit for you. And sometimes the specific founder, right, with a specific technology matches up better and has more success. And there's lots of different factors that go into it. But if you're not getting to that point where you're starting to deal with those type 2 problems of scaling at some point within a reasonable time frame, and again, you have to set your expectations, it's a good reason to take a step back, take another look at your business plan, and really understand, is this worth the pain? Am I ever going to get to that payout at the end of this?
Great answers. Do you have any advice that you would give to someone right now that's out there? Just a couple sentences, if you can, just something concise. What would you say is something that they can do?
Yeah, something concise, I would say do something.
Okay.
Right?
Very general.
Very general. But it's in college, it was really fun to sit with your friends and talk about big ideas, right? Like, I'm going to be the next Elon Musk, or I'm going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg,
right,
or, Jeff Bezos, or, whoever it was that you were aspiring to be, or talk about these big ideas, talk about the flying cars and how cool it would be to do that someday. And that's really fun. You should do that regardless, just because it's a fun thing to do, with your friends. But let's just talk. At some point, you need to do something, even if that something is the worst possible version of things that you could do, right? And there's a distinction here. You shouldn't do anything with the intent to fail, right? You hear that kind of thrown around sometimes, like fail fast. And what they're saying is not go into it expecting to fail and just hurry up and drive yourself into the ground, right? Like, that's not what they're suggesting. what they're suggesting is do something, and if it fails, be aggressive enough with it that it fails quickly, right? So control the things you have control over. Don't worry about the things you don't have control over. And if it fails, that is completely reasonable. Just move on to the next thing. But the sooner you start doing those things and having those experiences and failing or succeeding, the more experience and insight you have into what you're going to do next. And the more depth you have in problems. One of the issues that I see with, and not issues, but one common aspect of student entrepreneurs is that most of their solutions are very consumer-based, customer-facing, because that is what they have dealt with their entire life. Right?
That's what you do, yeah.
That's what you do, right? When you're a child, you consume, right? Like you consume from your parents, and you consume from industry, and you consume pop culture, right? There's a reason pop culture is geared towards, 18 to 24-year-old individuals. Mm-hmm. They consume a lot, right? And so it's not uncommon for your ideas to be very consumer-facing. As you gain depth in any particular field, all of a sudden you're going to be exposed to all the behind the scenes, right? All the B2B interactions, all the manufacturing, all the opportunities that exist in this realm, in this niche that you didn't even know existed. And your next idea is going to be so much better because you have more context to what's actually bringing value into whatever particular area you're niching down into. Right. So do something would be my advice.
Do something.
Anything.
I like it. And anything. As long as you're doing something, something's happening.
Yep.
Yeah. Great advice. Any other thoughts? Any closing remarks for people?
No, I've really enjoyed the 2 years that I've been here at BYU so far. Again, this is kind of a different episode for our podcast due to some scheduling conflicts, that's what we'll call them. But no, I'm glad I got the chance today to kind of come back in. I did one of these really early on when we started the podcast, so I'm glad we could kind of come full circle. Any kind of closing remarks? I think maybe the biggest piece of advice that I would have given myself as a student is to leverage the opportunities that are available to you at BYU outside of your major. So I did mechanical engineering, right? And I was fully focused on school and trying to get good grades, emphasis on trying, right?
Right, it's mechanical engineering.
Yeah, it's day-to-day, class to class for sure. But, I didn't take advantage of the Rollins Center and the validation and traction grants that they have there. I didn't take advantage of the law school and some of the patenting programs that they have there for students, right? I didn't take advantage of the different clubs and the different networking events, right? Like instead of going to a networking event, I would just, hunker down and focus on my homework. And obviously there needs to be balance, right? You can't blow off your homework to go to every networking event. Sure. But I wished I would have left school with a better network of people who were doing things that I could circle back on.
Right.
I've built a tremendous network, not only from my time here at BYU, but from, working outside. But I wish when I was a student, I would have done a better job of taking advantage of those opportunities, participating in the competitions, going to the networking events so that I could leave having done more and been better positioned to take advantage of the different opportunities that I've come across outside of school.
Right, because colleges like BYU or any college that you attend would be remiss to not be encouraging people to be starting businesses and be even putting money in towards that because that helps them in the end.
Yeah, ultimately, right? I mean, BYU relies on their alumni network, right? For a lot of the donations that come into the university. Right. And so they are setting you up to succeed more than you actually realize. You just have... Honestly, I don't know that you have enough experience to really understand the value of the opportunities that are being presented to you outside of class, right? You come in having gone through high school, having focused on academics your entire life. That's what you got you into BYU. And so that would be my one piece of advice that I think I would give to my younger self and any aspiring entrepreneur right now is to take off those blinders, really try to understand what it means to be successful in entrepreneurship, make those connections that you need to make here at the university, and take advantage of all the different programs and resources and events that are made available to you. They really do have value, even if you don't quite understand what that value is yet.
Right. Awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Kyle. I know that I kind of put you on the spot today by bringing you in to do the interview, but I appreciate your flexibility. And I think this was a good conversation.
That was great. Thank you. I'm not much of an entrepreneur, like I said, but like even hearing this stuff is really cool. It's very interesting, and it helps me understand my role and how I can help other people too. So it's pretty cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you.